Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'll start, as always, with an update on the key statistics in relation to COVID-19. As at 9 o'clock this morning, there have been 18,045 positive cases confirmed. You recall that since yesterday, this total now includes data from UK-wide testing sites, and that is an increase of 15 overall from the figures yesterday. A total of 986 patients are in hospital with confirmed or suspected COVID-19. Now, that represents a total increase of 116 from yesterday, but let me stress that there is a reduction of 11 in the number of confirmed cases. A total of 19 people last night were in intensive care with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19, and that is an increase of 1 since yesterday. I'm also able to confirm that since the 5th of March, a total of 3,929 patients who had tested positive and previously required hospital treatment have now been discharged from hospital. However, in the past 24 hours, 5 deaths were registered of a patient confirmed through a test as having COVID-19. The total number of deaths in Scotland under that measurement is therefore now 2,453. Tomorrow, of course, we will see the weekly publication from National Records for Scotland, which gives us the total number of deaths, both those confirmed through a test and those who are suspected of having had COVID-19. Let me again send my deepest condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one as a result of this virus and is currently grieving one of the unique human beings who lie behind these statistics. And let me also, as usual, express my thanks to our health and care workers and indeed to all of our key workers for everything you continue to do in extremely challenging circumstances. Now, as well as the Chief Medical Officer, I'm joined today by Fiona Hyslop, the Economy Secretary. The main focus for today's remarks is the economy. This morning, the latest labour market statistics for Scotland were published. They cover the period from February through to April, and April was, of course, the first full month of the lockdown restrictions. Today's figures show that when compared to the 3 months from November to January, unemployment in Scotland increased from 97,000 to 127,000. The unemployment rate during this period increased from 3.5% to 4.6%, and the employment rate fell from 74.9% to 74.3%. Now, I should stress this is a sample survey. The Fraser of Allender Institute this morning has reminded us that we have to be cautious about what we conclude from it. However, we do know a couple of things already. Firstly, that the protection of the job retention scheme that was put in place at the start of lockdown will mean that these figures are likely to be an underestimate of the full impact of COVID-19 on business activity. And secondly, because these figures cover only until April, they don't yet give us a fully up-to-date picture. The statistics that were also published this morning on Claimant Count cover the month of May, so give us a more up-to-date indication, although it's important to stress that these statistics are still experimental. But they suggest that the Claimant Count in Scotland in May was 7.8%, which is the same level as the UK as a whole. However, what all of this data undoubtedly demonstrates is that dealing with the public health crisis of COVID has created an economic crisis that demands our full focus and attention. Now, I know that these kinds of statistics and generally increasing economic anxiety will lead some to argue for a quicker than planned exit from lockdown, and I absolutely understand that. But difficult though all of this is, we must guard against a reckless relaxation of lockdown measures. Because if we ease restrictions too quickly and allow the virus to run out of control again, that would be economically counterproductive, but it would also cost many more lives. Indeed, the progress we've made in suppressing the virus, progress that is evident again in the figures I've reported today, is an essential foundation for the sustainable economic recovery that we want to secure. And the key point is this: the more we can suppress this virus now, the more normality we can restore as we do open up the economy and society. And also the more able we will then be to cope with any resurgence of the virus, either from sporadic outbreaks like the one China is dealing with right now, or increased transmission as we face the winter period and the flu season. However, all of that said, Scotland does, like other countries around the world, face the challenge of how we do now open up our economy in a way that is safe and sustainable. On Thursday, I will announce the outcome of our review into lockdown restrictions, and I hope and expect that on Thursday we will be able to confirm a move from phase 1 to phase 2 of our plan for reopening the economy and lifting restrictions more generally. Now, let me stress, as I did yesterday, that does not mean that all major changes will happen overnight, but I do hope in the coming weeks that further important restrictions will be lifted so that, for example, workers can return to factories with strict hygiene and physical distancing measures in place, so that the construction industry can continue with its own restart plan, and so that non-essential retail businesses can have a date for safe reopening. Now, none of this will restore the economy immediately to full health, but it will be a significant and a sustainable improvement on our current position, and that, of course, is important. That gradual re-emergence from lockdown is crucial. That is how we allow our businesses to start to operate and to make money again. But we know that because that re-emergence by necessity is gradual, then it must also be accompanied by continued support for business as business seeks to recover. We have welcomed assistance from the UK government, such as the Job Retention Scheme, but it is essential that this scheme is extended if that proves necessary, which I think is almost certain, and we are making that case to the UK government. In addition, the Scottish Government has provided £2.3 billion of support for business, for example, through domestic rates relief, a sum which more than matches the total we received through UK Government consequentials. And today I want to confirm 2 additional measures to promote economic recovery in the immediate term. Later today, Kate Forbes, the Finance Secretary, will set out to Parliament details of a further £230 million of support for the economy. Amongst other things, this package will fund maintenance for further and higher education facilities and for roads. It will help public transport to prepare for physical distancing measures, and it will include a further investment in companies of high potential and in developments such as Ravenscraig, Edinburgh Bioquarter and the Michelin site in Dundee. It will support, and it is designed to support, projects that can provide an immediate boost to jobs and growth while also helping to prepare our economy and our public services for the future. We're also providing further support today for skills and training. During this crisis, the Scottish Government has already invested additional money in services such as Fair Start Scotland, and as I've said, standing here on previous occasions, Skills Development Scotland has expanded some of its support for people who are looking for training and employment. Today we are making individual training accounts available to people who are out of work or on low incomes. Last year, these accounts helped more than 18,000 people to develop new skills and take up new positions. And this year, we are adapting them to respond to the emerging labour market challenges. From July, they'll offer access to online training in areas such as computing and IT, construction, early years provision and care. Initially, we expect to release 14,000 accounts, with more becoming available later in the year, and further details of these courses will be available on the My World of Work website. Now, I know not everyone who is eligible will be able to take advantage of this. If you have caring responsibilities, which of course many more people, especially parents, do right now, or if you are volunteering to help others, time to train and study will be pretty limited. But for some people, especially perhaps, though not exclusively, people who are currently furloughed on a relatively low income or who have been made unemployed, it does make sense to develop new skills at this time. So these learning accounts will offer a further way of supporting people who want to do that as we seek to emerge from lockdown. Now, the other issue I want to briefly talk about today is free school meals and emergency food support more generally. Free school meals are currently being made available to around 175,000 children across Scotland, either within local authority and early years premises which are still open, or more often through direct cash payments, supermarket vouchers, or the direct supply of food or meals. I can confirm today that this provision will be extended right throughout the summer holiday period. We know families are under considerable financial pressure just now, and free school meals are a vital help to many, but they're also really important to the health and well-being of children. So we will provide £12.6 million in funding to local authorities to enable the continuation of free school meals during the period from the end of June to the start of the new term in August. The funding will be allocated in a way that allows councils, as many of them currently do, to coordinate school meal provision with wider support that they make available to families. In addition to that, we're making £15 million available to councils to maintain some of that wider support, in particular the support for food, which is currently available for people in severe poverty, people who face other barriers to getting food, and people who are being asked to isolate under the new Test and Protect system. Our support for those who are shielding, which I should say comes from a different budget, is also, of course, being maintained. But at a time when, as these employment figures today show, many families will be finding it much harder than normal to make ends meet, I hope that these announcements provide some reassurance during an extremely difficult time. Now, before I hand over to the Cabinet Secretary, I just want to close, as usual, by emphasising our key public health guidance and to remind everybody that following this guidance now remains crucial to keeping the virus under control and allowing us to reopen the economy and to emerge from lockdown on a firm and a sustainable basis. So you should still be staying home as much as possible and meeting fewer people than normal. And let me remind you, when you do meet people from another household, please stay outdoors and stay 2 metres apart from them. Don't meet with more than one household at a time. Don't meet more than one a day. And please keep to a maximum of 8 people in a group. Please wash your hands. Often wear a face covering when you're in shops or in public transport or in any enclosed space where physical distancing is a bit more difficult. Avoid touching hard surfaces and remember to clean those you do touch. And remember, this will continue to be important for some time to come. If you have the symptoms of COVID-19, a fever, a new cough, a loss of or change in your sense of taste or smell, please book a test immediately and follow the advice on self-isolation. And you can book a test at the NHS Inform website. By doing all of this, we are saving lives and we are suppressing the virus. And if we continue to do that, we are also giving ourselves a much stronger opportunity to take both further and also firmer steps out of lockdown. So my thanks once again to all of you for doing all of the right things. I'll now hand over to Fiona Hyslop to say a few words before we move on to questions.
Thank you, First Minister. As outlined on Friday, we are dealing with significant economic effects from the continuing health crisis, and we do not underestimate the scale of the impacts on GDP and unemployment, and recognise the effects on our communities and especially on our society's most vulnerable people. Today's labour market statistics are the first to indicate a full month of lockdown measures, and the scale of the impact of COVID-19 on employment is only now emerging as the data catches up with that period. In the 3 months to April 2020, it shows that Scotland's employment rate estimate fell over the quarter to 74.3%, and the unemployment rate estimate rose over the quarter to 4.6%. In relation to our provisions and what we're doing, the government is very, very conscious that many people will be feeling a deep sense of anxiety about their livelihoods, and keeping people in work while supporting those who have lost their jobs will continue to be at the heart of our thinking as we carefully reopen the economy. Every penny we receive from the UK Government to support our businesses is being passed on and more. Our package of support now totals more than £2.3 billion. In addition, I've been working with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance on the Restart stimulus package mentioned by the First Minister, and I look forward to her announcement in the afternoon in Parliament. Work is continuing with businesses, trades unions, regulators and others to develop guidance that will support safer working as more parts of the economy restart. This week we will see us publish guidance on tourism and hospitality, creative industries and house moving, as well as updating guidance on manufacturing and retail as we move into phase 2 of the route map. We will also need to support those who have lost their jobs, and we are convening a labour market summit tomorrow to make sure we have a coordinated approach to tackling unemployment and giving people the skills they need as we re-emerge from the crisis. I, along with the Deputy First Minister, the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science, and the Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills, will be taking part in discussions on the scale of this challenge with Skills Development Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council. We will also be working with employers across Scotland to develop and stimulate job creation opportunities. We will be focused on the action needed to support people into work and to get the skills and training needed to succeed. In addition, the UK Government has to play its part, and I have written to the Chancellor on the need to extend the job retention scheme. More than 600,000 jobs have been furloughed in Scotland, and almost 150,000 people have made use of the self-employment scheme. And it's important that we ensure this support continues to be offered for as long as it is required, and we are asking them to work with us to ensure that support reflects the needs of Scotland's economy. We know that businesses will need further resources to aid recovery and as we gradually restart to rebuild capacity, but also to invest in growth and to support innovation and improve productivity. The economy will not go back to where it was, and we know globally that the impact will last for a long time. And this gradual return will require ongoing support. This needs to go beyond the financial, and our enterprise agencies will continue to work to safeguard jobs and supply chains. During all of this, it is important that we do not lose our focus on promoting fair work. In these difficult times, it is especially important that we ensure that those who have traditionally faced greater barriers in entering the labour market are not left behind.
Many thanks, Fiona. We'll now move to questions. The Chief Medical Officer, of course, is also with us today to help address the questions. First up today, Suzanne Allen from BBC Scotland.
Thank you, First Minister. The announcement earlier on school meals, will it be the national scheme that it is now, in that every child who is entitled to a free school meal will get one, or will it be like the holiday hunger programmes where it's up to the discretion of the council, the provision? Can you give me a few more details on it, please?
The funding I've announced today is to continue with the arrangements that councils have had in place throughout the crisis period, and they have been providing that in a range of different ways. Some have been providing free school meal entitlement through the hubs that have been open, but in the main it has been through cash equivalent or vouchers or actual food and meals. So it's to continue that provision. Obviously the rules on eligibility for free school meals are well known in Scotland, and that is what we want to see continue. But it's an important part of making sure that we are helping to mitigate some of the impact of the unusual circumstances we are living in just now, but also some of the economic impact that the kind of figures we have reported today are having. And it is part of an overall package of support that we will continue to keep under review to deal with the immediate effects of this crisis, but also as we come through it to rededicate ourselves, as we have been doing through many of the elements of our welfare system, to lift children more fundamentally and sustainably out of poverty. Ewan Petrie from STV.
Thank you very much, First Minister. You said there an extension to the furlough scheme was essential. Have you had any indication from the UK government that they would be willing to extend it, even on a sector-by-sector basis? And if not, are we simply seeing the tip of the iceberg right now?
So I'll hand over to the Economy Secretary, who will say a bit more about the representations we've made to the UK Government and the state of those discussions. We haven't had any definitive indication from the UK Government that they are willing to extend, but I very much remain hopeful that we will see a positive outcome to these discussions. As I said earlier on, these unemployment figures that are being reported today, of course only up until the end of April, are in themselves deeply concerning. But there is a danger that they mask the full impact of this crisis, because many people will still be in employment right now, so they are not registering as unemployed, but their continuation in employment is dependent on the furlough scheme and the job retention initiative. So if that is withdrawn before it is safe to do so, the danger is we see unemployment rise even further than unfortunately we may already see in the next few months. So I think it's really important, and other countries have already given indications of continuation of similar schemes. France has said that theirs might continue for a period of up to 2 years. It's really important that we avoid that cliff edge, and while we want to see that support continue in general, I think it is reasonable to say that there are some more detailed discussions about the particular sectors and the particular circumstances in which it is particularly important. We know in Scotland, for example, tourism is harder hit and is likely to be hit for longer than some other sectors. So that has to be taken account of as well. But Fiona can give an update on the representations we have already made.
So the Claimant Count is sitting at 7.8% for those applying for job seekers allowance and also universal credit. That's the same in the rest of the UK. Clearly, the job retention scheme is keeping people in employment. As the economy eases open, we would hope that a considerable amount of those people that are on the job retention scheme will be working with businesses that can recover and return, but not all will. So in a sense, the job retention scheme is disguising what the underlying unemployment figures are likely to be. And just as the Scottish Government is looking at its labour market response, so will the UK Government be looking at theirs. And the case I'm putting to the Chancellor is that he has to look at the sustainability of employment over a long period of time, because we know the economic impact, even on global demand pressures, will mean that this economic downturn will last some time. So it's better to keep people in employment, even if you're subsidising that, rather than have an increasing number of people in unemployment, because it takes more of a challenge and difficulty to get them back into employment. So I know that they have listened previously when we asked them to look at flexibility within the job retention scheme, and I also asked previously for an extension from August onwards, and that has been delivered. But we have yet to have a response, but I think we still need to make the case, particularly for the sectors that really matter to Scotland in terms of the longer term, because the impact will be longer, not just on tourism, hospitality and heritage and culture, but also oil and gas, because again, they'll have a longer lead time in terms of their response to what is a double-edged pressure on their particular sector.
Peter McMahon from ITV Border.
Thank you, First Minister. First Minister, the R number for Dumfries and Galloway is 0.56, and I know the Chief Medical Officer is beside you and likes precision, so the confidence limit is, just for detail, is 0.43 to 0.75. Your own figures show the proportion of COVID cases in the borders is 0, and there's no variation in that. ITV Board has spoken to Professor Chris Isles, Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary. Now, he says with those figures, you could get the hospitals working again, provided there's proper social distancing. You could restart the tourism industry, and you could even get the schools back to some extent with proper social distancing. Now, when I've asked you about this in the past, you haven't ruled it out. But for the sake of patients and children in schools and the tourism industry, in Dumfries and Galloway and the south of Scotland in general, wouldn't it be helpful if you could rule it in?
I will hand over to the Chief Medical Officer, who I'm sure will have something to say, not just about the precision, but about the reliability of that estimate that you've given. And, don't get me wrong, I have no interest at all. I have zero interest in keeping any part of the country in any lockdown measures for longer than necessary. But as the Chief Medical Officer will more eloquently explain than I can, and I've said this before, it's why we don't publish regional R numbers, because the way in which these are calculated mean that if you go down to levels of geographic levels that are that small, the unreliability of that increases, and it becomes much more risky to base judgments on the strength of that. So that's why we don't do that, but Gregor will say more about that. Look, we're at the stage now where we are being reasonably successful in suppressing this virus. I think we've got to continue to stick with it to get infection rates even lower than they are right now. We'll, on Thursday, as we always do now, we'll give the up-to-date estimate of the R number and the what we estimate the infectious pool of people across Scotland is, and I hope we will see continued downward movement in that. So I want now to get all of Scotland moving out of lockdown, and I hope that on Thursday, while I say this again just so that I'm not giving anybody false impressions, it will not simply be a flicking of the switch, and on Friday morning all of these things that have been stopped will start, but over this phase 2 I hope we can see some really significant steps taken for all of Scotland to start to get us back to normal, and that will include aspects of getting the health service back to normal. That work is already underway in areas like cancer and elective surgery, and that will continue. The only final point I would make about the NHS is partly about making sure we can safely resume these services, but the NHS for the next period will also require to make sure that should we be hit with a resurgence of the virus now or more likely into the autumn, we have the capacity in the NHS to deal with that. So, for these reasons, these continue to be fine and often difficult balances to strike, but we are moving firmly in the right direction, and I believe that is the case not just for certain parts of Scotland, but I believe that is the case for all of Scotland. Gregor.
So it's reassuring, very reassuring to hear you starting to use things like the range for R here, and I think that's really, really important that we take that into account. One of the problems that we experience when we start to break down data to smaller and smaller population levels is it's much more subject to fluctuations. So because the population's smaller, a small fluctuation in the numbers that we start to see can actually have a disproportionate impact on the way that we record the data that comes from that using the mathematical equations that we have. And that's one of the reasons why small population calculations of R and other numbers are just always come with a sense of caution. And that we shouldn't read too much into them at any one time. Having said that, however, we should always say that we always use not just one set of data, but a combination of data to assess different parts of the country and the effects that it's having. So it's not just about R. We've said all along that R is important, but it's not just about R, it's about the case numbers. It's about actually the types of presentations that we're seeing in other types of contacts with the health service, such as NHS 24, and not just the kind of hospital cases. So we take all those different data sources into account while we're assessing exactly what each part of the country, their actual unique experience of the COVID-19 pandemic is.
Okay, thanks. Katrine Bussey from PA.
Good afternoon, First Minister. I too wanted to ask about the issue of holiday hunger and free school meals. We saw yesterday the footballer, the Premiership footballer Marcus Rashford make a really emotional, really personal plea to the UK government to continue the free school meals scheme in England. Do you think that the UK government should be looking at following in your footsteps and continuing funding for free school meals provision throughout the summer holidays?
Well, given that the Scottish Government has taken the decision to do it, I think it follows from that I think it is absolutely the right thing to do. Now, I've, during this crisis, tried to just take responsibility for the decisions that I have as First Minister of Scotland and not try to tell other people how to do things. But I hope we will see all governments across the UK make sure that the issue of hunger and food poverty is properly tackled, and I think continuing support over the summer period for free school meals is one way to do that. And I would take the opportunity actually to pay tribute to Marcus Rashford for the very powerful case that he has made, which I certainly read yesterday. And footballers and people like him sometimes get a bad press, but I think he has been a very good example of somebody from his own life experience making a case that I think all of us as politicians, and I say all of us, I'm not just talking about other people here, I'm talking about all of us, have to pay heed to in this situation we face. Vivian Aitken from the Daily Record.
Afternoon, First Minister. Phase 2 suggests that smaller retail outlets will be able to reopen first. But does that mean that smaller retail units within shopping centres probably won't open at the start of phase 2? Or will the whole shopping centre be able to open?
Can I ask for your forgiveness and forbearance in advance, because I'm not going to go into the phase 2 decisions today, because I will announce those decisions on Thursday, and that's not just about me putting them off a couple of days. We have a very detailed process of assessment that we are currently going through. The Cabinet had a lengthy and very detailed discussion about this morning, and over the course of today and tomorrow we will have a final look at the data and make these final judgments. I think there will perhaps be different issues around indoor shopping centres, but we need to come to final decisions on that. But what I would say generally right now is we want to do as much as possible. So we want to be as maximalist as we can in the changes we make, but we must ensure that we're not being reckless and that we're not risking a resurgence of the virus by anything that we do too quickly. So these continue to be, even with the figures going down, these continue to be really difficult judgments, and we've got to do as much as we can to get them right. I think I said this yesterday, but this for everybody has been a really difficult experience in the past 3 months. But I've always been conscious that we would reach a stage, which I think we're in right now, where because we see the virus data going so firmly in the right direction, that people start to say, well, why don't we just more quickly go back to normal? And, for me it's easier, ironically, for me to persuade people that we need restrictions in place when I'm reading out dreadful numbers every day. When the numbers, still difficult numbers, get less dreadful, I'm going to have a tougher job to persuade people why we need restrictions in place. But it is really important that we do this at the right pace and that we don't risk the progress that we've made. And that patience, however difficult it is, will pay dividends in the future, because it does mean that as we do start to lift more of these measures, we can restore more normality if we've got infection levels at a much lower level than we would be able to if we were still dealing with higher infection levels. Simon Johnson from The Telegraph.
Hi. The Scottish Chambers of Commerce have reacted to this morning's unemployment figures, saying that it is clear that the relaxation of the 2 metre distance to 1 metre will be essential to prevent wholesale economic collapse of the retail, hotel and restaurant sectors. Do you agree with that analysis? Is it essential? And also, can you give business owners any indication as to how close Scotland is to meeting your test of the virus being effectively eradicated before you'll look at the 2 metre rule?
Well, just to be accurate, Simon, that's not what I've said. I've said we will keep that under ongoing review, so I haven't set a particular condition for looking at it. So it's important that I have my actual words reported, not words that are put into my mouth that I've not uttered. So we will keep that under ongoing review. And I will report on Thursday, as I report the phase 2 decisions, what our estimates for the current levels of infection in Scotland are. And I hope that will see a continued reduction, and I hope it will show that Scotland is not quite at complete suppression of this virus, but is getting closer to that. And again, I'd make this point: the closer to that level we get, the more latitude we give ourselves to get more normality back. And that it gets harder and harder to appeal to people for patience. I absolutely understand that, but patience right now actually will bring rewards in the future on this, and that's why it's important that we don't lose sight of the plan that we are following. On the 2 metre rule more generally, what would be disastrous for business right now is if this virus runs out of control again and we are back to square one. I've made it pretty clear that I think it is wrong, fundamentally wrong, to see 2 metres in isolation when it comes to suppressing the virus, notwithstanding the practical difficulties that I know it gives for businesses. But we have to see this in the round. We have to be certain that the package of things we are doing are capable of keeping a deadly virus under control. Because if we fail in that, then our economy, our society, all of our lives will be much more adversely affected. So again, I would encourage people to see this as part of a by necessity, careful and considered plan for moving forward to greater normality. And again, the more we suppress this virus, the more these things open up as possibilities. Callum Ross from the P&J.
Thanks, First Minister. I wondered if I could ask you about NHS Orkney. The chief executive there has faced calls to step down in recent weeks over journeys made during lockdown, and now its clinical quality advisor has resigned, saying the board's dysfunction meant it had been unable to cope during the pandemic. Liam MacArthur, local MSP, has called for an investigation. Is that something the Scottish Government's considering?
I think in terms of the issue over alleged breaches of lockdown, there is, my understanding is there is an ongoing investigation by the board into that, and it probably would not be appropriate for me to say anything that would prejudice that right now. Overall, I mean, we work very closely with health boards generally, not just during this crisis, but all of the time. And the Health Secretary, who is not here today because she's going to be answering a question in Parliament, obviously is in the leadership position around that. I think NHS Orkney has coped well during the crisis, as all health boards have, but we continue to work with all health boards to make sure they have the support in place and the right measures in place to continue to do so. Scott McNabb from the Scotsman.
Thank you, First Minister. You're suggesting today that these gloomy figures actually mask the full scale of the impact on the economy. I'd like to ask, given you previously indicated that Holyrood would require further financial powers, borrowing powers in order to offset the full impact, have you had any response from the UK government to that plea? And if not, or if it's negative, is it likely or more likely that we're likely to have to face some cuts to the Scottish budget in these summer revisions which are coming up?
I'll hand to Fiona again. Her and Kate Forbes, of course, are leading these discussions with the UK government.
Well, clearly the UK has got the substantial powers to do what other countries are doing and borrowing, or indeed using the Bank of England provision and quantitative easing to generate the funds that are underpinning substantial investments to support the economy at this stage. Scotland doesn't have that, but we also know the strains on the fiscal arrangement that Scotland currently has is being challenged by COVID, and we certainly think in a very practical sense what is required is a flexibility even within the responsibilities that we have. Certainly being able to borrow, if you look at the rates that governments can borrow, they're very, very low at this point. This would be an appropriate time to do so. But nobody wants to see cuts like the austerity cuts that we saw after the financial crisis. So therefore, trying to invest for growth, trying to ensure that we can have job creation, that we can have confidence back in the economy is what we need. We don't have the current financial levers to do that. But even within the devolved settlement, there are very practical things that can be done. And my colleague, Kate Forbes, will be setting some of those issues out in the debate in Parliament this afternoon.
Michael Blackley from the Daily Mail.
Hello, good afternoon. You made clear in your speech that there are people who want you to take a faster route back out of lockdown in order to ease the impact on unemployment. The Federation of Small Businesses have said today that governments need to move quickly to help local firms get back to business and create jobs. Do you acknowledge that if we do take a slower route than the rest of the UK, there might be a short-term impact that means we do continue to see unemployment rise faster in Scotland than in other parts of the UK?
Firstly, I don't necessarily think it is the case that we're seeing unemployment rise faster in Scotland. The figures for unemployment today, as others have pointed out, that's a sample survey. There's confidence intervals in there, which means that there's not necessarily a statistically meaningful difference there. But if we look at the Claimant Count for May, we see both Scotland and the rest of the UK at a very similar level. But whether it's going faster or slower in Scotland, these figures are going in the wrong direction, and that means all of us have to safely and sustainably get the economy reopened. For me, it's not about going fast or slow. I want to go as fast as possible, but the most important thing is going safely, because if we don't do that, then in whether it's a few weeks or a few months, we run the risk of being back where we started here with the requirement to reimpose, if not a blanket lockdown, then lockdowns in parts of the country or in different sectors of the economy. And I want to do everything possible to avoid that, because that will do more damage to the economy, but because it will also mean more virus circulating, it will probably take more lives as well. When we look at the figures in Scotland right now, it is totally understandable that people think this virus has kind of gone away, so we can afford to go more quickly. But the virus hasn't gone away. It has been suppressed because of lockdown. So as we lift lockdown, we've got to be very careful that we don't do that at a pace that allows it to circulate again, and that as we come out of lockdown, we're also taking steps to suppress it and control it in other ways. Test and protect is not the only thing, but it is really important, but so too is physical distancing for the moment, and also washing your hands and following all of the other hygiene advice. So it's not gone away in Scotland, but we only have to look at other parts of the world right now to show that it is still a risk. China, Beijing, is dealing with an outbreak right now. We see in some of the states in America that cases are rising again as lockdown has started to be lifted, even in New Zealand, albeit from people coming into the country after a number of days with no cases. There have cases been identified there. Now, these are all hopefully able to be dealt with, but it does demonstrate that this virus hasn't gone away. And if we take our eye off the ball, or if we act recklessly right now, then we will allow it to spread again. And we'll be back here, I'll be back here telling you about numbers that are much grimmer than the ones we're dealing with right now. So I know how frustrating this is for everybody. It's frustrating for me as well. But my duty to the country, from the start of this to the end of this, is to get us through safely. And that means making judgments about the right pace to go at, to make sure that when we reopen our economy again, we're doing so sustainably and we're not running the risk of having to shut it again weeks or months later. Kieran Andrews from The Times.
Thanks, First Minister. The Treasury is considering cutting VAT in a move that was backed by the Economy Secretary on Good Morning Scotland this morning. I just wondered if the Scottish Government is considering either imposing council tax freezes again or income tax cuts to help people whose wages are going to stagnate or fall in real terms on the back of the pandemic.
I'll hand over to Fiona about VAT, and then I'll happily add to that.
Well, I said this morning that I thought a VAT cut as a stimulus would be something that the UK government should consider, particularly for the tourism industry. The VAT rate for tourism in the UK is one of the highest across Europe, and that would provide an immediate stimulus, particularly to that sector. But in terms of looking at how we can support business in a whole range of different areas, we've done things that haven't happened in the rest of the UK. For example, in terms of the freezing of the rates for all businesses, that's something that, again, that's additional in Scotland. Some of the additional support for companies that are vital to either national or regional economies were supported from the Pivotal Resilience Fund, and also we have a Creative Hospitality and Tourism Hardship Fund that doesn't exist in the rest of the UK, as well as a newly self-employed fund. So there are things that we can do which is about supporting business in the response stage, but certainly going forward trying to look at issues, whether it's around regulations, whether it's around planning, whether it's around other areas that we can look at to help support business, we will. But of course, immediately we have to make sure that there is an easing of the economy that is sustainable and supported. So, for example, the £2 million Town Centre Fund will be supporting those businesses in our town centres when the time is right for them to reopen.
Just so that I don't sit here running here, we're not actively specifically looking at the things that you mentioned there, but we will keep all options before us as we go through the crisis and out of the other end of the crisis into recovery. From the comments that both I and Fiona have made today, you'll see that the emphasis is very much on direct targeted support to boost economic activity and to help those who are living in poverty and struggling most to make ends meet. And I think that's right for this stage in terms of how we target that support, but we will continue to look carefully as we go through our own budget processes about the action and further initiatives that might be required in future. Derek Keeley from the Courier.
Thank you, First Minister. I wanted to ask you about that economy support package. Are you able to say at this stage how much of the £230 million funding will go towards the Michelin site in Dundee? And I know there was mention of roads and public transport, but can you give a bit more information about how you expect that funding to be used?
The Finance Secretary will set out the detail in Parliament this afternoon, and for reasons that you will understand, it's important that I allow her to do that. But there will be a balance across all of these different issues that I've set out in headline terms right now. But the focus of all of it is about immediate economic stimulus and supporting immediate economic activity.
Looking at the package which will be announced this afternoon, we've tried to identify areas on a regional basis and on a sectoral basis. I visited the Michelin Park very shortly after I came into office. I'm inspired about that vision of transition, and I think the ambitions to have a green economy and to transfer skills into that area is clearly a way that can help us as we emerge from the COVID crisis, but also build a more resilient economy, not just for Dundee, but for the rest of Scotland.
Okay, thanks. Tom Martin from The Express.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, First Minister. Just returning to the issue of the economy, one of the things that retailers have been asking for is a clearer timetable of when, non-essential high street shops could open, similar to the July 15th date that's been indicated the hospitality industry. I just wondered what's prevented you from giving that sort of clarity around it, an indicative date so far, and when do you hope to be in a position to do so?
I will do that on Thursday, barring unforeseen reasons why that would change. But as I said earlier on, that's what I hope to do on Thursday as we announce whether or not we're going into phase 2 and then what the phasing of the phase 2 measures will be. Chris Musson from The Sun.
Hi, First Minister. It's been reported today that in England, all patients with COVID will be given dexamethasone steroids from today after it was proven to cut the death risk. Can you or the Chief Medical Officer say if this is something which is happening in Scotland too or being considered?
The University of Oxford's just publishing information today, I think it is at lunchtime, which is about their trials into the use of dexamethasone with patients, and certainly it has a role in some patients, perhaps not all patients, but certainly for many patients, in terms of how we mediate and reduce some of the extreme elements of the inflammatory response. And we await further confirmation of the outcome of that trial, and we'll consider that. And we're currently working with the DHSC in England to see how we will use the dexamethasone that's available in the UK for that purpose.
Okay. And lastly, unless I have misremembered, which I don't think I have, David Ball from The Herald.
Thank you, First Minister. Statistics out today show the Scottish Government failed to meet climate emission targets up to 2018. I was just wondering whether the 2045 net zero target is still realistic, and whether you are confident transport providers and businesses will still be able to play their part given the strain that will be on the economy.
Yes, I do absolutely believe not only that the net zero target is realistic, but it is essential that we meet it. The climate crisis hasn't gone away because of the pandemic. If anything, as we come out of this, it becomes more important that we complete that transition to a net zero economy, indeed to a net zero society. And the figures today, although for particular reasons that I know the Environment Secretary will cover in Parliament later on, the Beast from the East and some issues around Hunterston, there was an increase in the annual statistics, and annual statistics will sometimes fluctuate. Overall, the reduction is around 50% already in Scotland's emissions. So we are very well placed to now go forward towards that greater ambition. And the last point I would make on this is that is also a key part of our economic recovery from the pandemic, because that's where Scotland not only has a real environmental and moral imperative, but real competitive and relative advantage as well if we do the right things and invest in the right places. So we remain as committed as we have ever been, if not more so, to meeting that 2045 target and also meeting the very challenging milestones along the way. That, I think, concludes the questions, and can I thank all of the journalists for joining us today. My thanks to Fiona and to Gregor and to Yvonne, our BSL interpreter today, and my thanks to you. As I said yesterday, and probably as you will hear me saying repeatedly, this probably gets more frustrating the more progress we make, because all of us just want to go back to normal as quickly as possible. But it's really, really important that we continue to follow the plan and that we continue to be careful and cautious, because the progress we have made so far is not by accident. It is because of all the measures that collectively we have been abiding by. As we start to ease them and lift them, as we will continue to do, then we've got to do it carefully and put in place the other mitigations. The virus hasn't gone away, so we have to remain focused on suppressing it and keeping it suppressed so that it doesn't come back, damage our economy again and take even more lives. So everything you're doing right now, difficult though it is making a difference, and it really, really matters. So thank you again for all that you're doing, and please for now keep doing it. I will be tomorrow in Parliament at the slightly earlier time of 12:20 for First Minister's questions, when I'll be answering questions from opposition party leaders rather than from journalists. And this week I will also deliver the update on Thursday from Parliament rather than from St Andrew's House. That will be at 12:30, the usual time for this update. But as well as giving the daily figures, I will of course also on Thursday announce the decision about whether or not we can go into phase 2, and I hope that decision will be a positive one, and then I will set out what that means in terms of restrictions being eased over the course of that 3-week phase 2 period. So I hope you will join us then, but in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today.